Hello, I'm Lori Matway, the Associate Superintendent for Student and Community Services. Today, I'm here to discuss some important medical news. Joining us is Dr. Greg Savel, a leading pediatrician from Pinellas County and recognized by the CDC for his work with children. Welcome, Dr. Savel, and thank you for joining us for these two topics, e-cigarettes and secondhand smoke.
I'm always appreciative to be with you on the air, and I hope that we'll be able to educate the people today and change some lives.
Thank you very much. Well, first let's start with the dangers of nicotine and secondhand smoke.
Well, people have known for many years about the dangers of nicotine, and we'll talk some about secondhand smoke as well. Its effect on people smoking, the parents, its effect on the children, and that's what we're here to talk about today, and their learning disabilities and other issues caused by hypoxia or low oxygen, secondary to having the smoke in the atmosphere where they live, long before that smoke could cause cancer or other horrible effects as they grow older. And it is something which affects so many of the people in this community. And I think if parents knew more and the teachers knew more about all the horrendous effects of smoke, that perhaps they would work harder to rid it from our society entirely.
Now, why do you think it's taken so long for this to really come to the limelight of the importance of knowing about secondhand smoke? And we've all known family members that have smoked and traveled in cars with members that smoked, but now it's really kind of highlighted what the negative effects. Why is it taking so long?
Well, I think there's a lot of controversy about that. The medical people have known about the effects of firsthand and secondhand and thirdhand smoke forever. But unfortunately, many people began smoking a long time ago for a myriad of reasons. We know that there are products like nicotine in cigarettes, etc., that were addicting in nature, and that there were people behind the scenes, tobacco lobbies in Washington, trying to block legislation that would affect their ability to make a profit. And so finally, when close to 90% of humans in our country at least don't smoke, why is it that we allow the 10% of people to pollute the atmosphere when, of course, only 10% do that and 90% understand that? So finally, more and more people are not smoking, and that is what has given us a voice.
Great. Okay, so when we say secondhand smoke, what do you really mean?
Well, it's anything coming out of the other end of a cigarette or a pipe or a cigar, etc. And we'll talk about e-cigarettes in a moment. But we now know that people who at least smoke filtered cigarettes, and some don't have filters, but filters take out some of the toxins. They've always bragged about that for years. Obviously, we know the incidence of cancer in people who smoke filtered cigarettes is very, very high. But because of the filter, we now know that that which comes out the other end, the secondhand smoke, is 10, 50, 100, or 1,000 times worse, full of pollutants and cancer-causing agents and other poisons than that which the person who is smoking. And that's the thing about it. The 10% of people are actually having a better scene from smoking than the 90% who are forced to put up with it, who choose not to smoke.
Wow. So when we talk about secondhand smoke, is it the same chemicals that you would have if you were smoking the cigarette yourself?
Well, yes, but some of those chemicals that are in there, which were partially filtered out, are now out there to be burned. So not only do we have that, but we have the mixing of the carcinogenic effect of things burning. And so there are so many chemicals, 60, 70, 80, some people say 200 carcinogenic causing chemicals. We know cancer causing agents that are in a cigarette that are out there in the atmosphere, and it has been clearly shown that people who are only exposed to this secondhand smoke for a brief period of time have their chances of cancer going up dramatically.
Wow, that's amazing. And how are people exposed to secondhand smoke? What situations?
You know, it could be directly because you live in a home where people smoke. It can be there in the home as you're eating dinner, while you're watching television, or in the car, far worse, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But that's the point, is that it can be anywhere. You can be walking outside and somebody goes by you and you smell smoke. That little bit of exposure can cause lifelong problems for you. And that's something we've known about for a while, but people have only recently chosen to believe. You walk by a non-smoking area to a restaurant, for example, where thank goodness in our state no one can any longer smoke. But as you walk in, there's 50 people outside, or even 2 smoking. You breathe that in, that's enough to cause you to be nauseous or have any other problems that smoking can cause.
Well, as a former waitress, I'm very thankful that they've stopped that in restaurants, because we didn't get exposed to that every single day we worked. So more and more people are complaining about secondhand smoke. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think people now realize more and more all the terrible problems that have happened, you know, with the effects of smoking over the years. They realize that their health is at risk just by being around smoking. And as the percentages have gone up of those who don't smoke, people have finally opened their mouths. Maybe there are more and more people in our government who choose not to smoke also, and who aren't being affected by the lobbyists in Washington from the big tobacco companies and companies that make the products that go into e-cigarettes as well. People are finally standing up and saying, we're not going to take this anymore. We've chosen to be healthy. Why are we allowing others to change that?
Okay, so for that critical market, our pregnant women,
Yes.
our children, what's happening with this? I mean, how do we make sure that they're protected?
Well, this is a wonderful question to ask, because the problems of pregnant women aren't just in mothers who choose to smoke while they're pregnant, which is a terrible, terrible thing,
Yes.
but for pregnant women who are walking around exposed to other smoke. Smoking causes a closing down of the tissue in the lungs where one cannot absorb as much oxygen, leading to a state of hypoxia or low oxygen, which can make somebody somewhat sick if you're not pregnant. But if you are pregnant, therefore you have the oxygen being decreased to a baby.
Wow.
And depending upon what stage of pregnancy it is, if it's in the beginning stages, that can affect a normal development of brain, heart, or any of the other body organs, so much so that even brief exposures during the first trimester can have lifelong effects to a baby being born and going on to live. But a woman who's exposed to smoke, whether she chooses to do so herself or from secondhand or third-hand smoke, in the third trimester of pregnancy can be put into premature labor and can have babies who are shown to almost have nicotine addiction. Babies become addicted and show signs of withdrawal after they're being born, even when a woman didn't smoke herself but was exposed to smoke during her third trimester.
Wow, that's amazing. What are some ways that children are exposed to secondhand smoke? We're going to talk about the car, I know.
Yeah, well, that's the biggest problem is the car, because people ask me what happens, because people think if kids are around smoking, well, maybe they'll just have asthma. But you know, it isn't like that. Because women choose to smoke sometimes or put their kids around smoke when they're infants. And babies are born as human beings who can survive outside the womb, but no part of their body is fully grown.
Right.
Their hearts are still growing, their brains are still growing, etc. So babies who grow up in an atmosphere of smoke are known to have learning defects. They're known to have lower IQs, have worse chance to have attention deficit disorder as they get older, because as all those neural pathways are forming after birth in the first several years of life, when there's hypoxia or lack of oxygen, it can have lifelong complications with that. But we see kidney disease, we see heart disease, and we see disease in the other organs as well. But you were right to bring up the car. That's the area where kids are often exposed to the highest concentrations, and they can't get away from it.
Exactly. Well, here in Pinellas County School District, we have a policy that you can't smoke on our property.
Yes.
But we have issues, and we have complaints from staff that parents are in their cars driving up the bus circle, and they tell us we have every right, we're in our own car. You know, what do you recommend for staff? How do you handle that situation?
Well, here's the most important thing to say, and I think you know this, but maybe some don't. There is absolutely no constitutional right to smoke. People tell you all the time, I have the right to do what I want. You know, we have a lot of things today in the media about First Amendment rights, the ability to say what you want and do as you please. But there is no right to smoke. And smoking is a very odd thing, because it's probably the only thing that people tolerate out in public that actually causes harm to those who choose not to. And so people don't have any right to do it. But when it comes to the staff, and it's a terrible thing, because in some of the schools, of course the elementary schools, of course, where kids are dropped off, in the most cases middle schools as well, obviously before kids drive, there could be hundreds of people every day bringing their kids in, and as a staff, I'm sure you want to yell at them, because you know these things to be true.
Absolutely.
And I know you have that rule. But as it turns out, the American Academy of Pediatrics has come out very strongly saying, if you smoke in the car with your child, that is child abuse. It is recognized by the government, by law enforcement, as much child abuse as someone who physically or sexually or verbally or emotionally abuses their child. And that is the take-home message for the staff. You can tell them, you're not allowed to smoke on this campus. We advise you highly, because you're doing damage to your child by smoking in the car, to please refrain from doing so. And in the future, don't ever drive onto this campus again while you still have a lit cigarette, because you are in violation of state and county ordinances and the school board's way of doing business. And since they know that it's child abuse, they will be able to understand that. Whether they choose to use such strong language when you're just trying to get the day started or ended, I understand that. I'm a person of very strong opinions based on medical fact, and I don't expect people standing in the car lines to say these things. But when they know that it can be considered child abuse, that'll help drive them to know that even if it's the 50th time they've had to say it that morning, it's still worth saying, because maybe if only 1 or 2 of those 50 people will say, I was thinking of a reason not to smoke, or maybe I won't smoke in the car. Maybe you've changed the lives of several people forever, not just the child or the person who chooses not to smoke, but all of the other people who might come in contact with that parent in the future. Lives can be saved and changed that way.
Well, I think it's great advice. And I think you've just empowered our staff to be able to use that to say, legally you can't do it. Yeah. You're harming yourself, your children, and even us. So thank you. And we're going to move over to e-cigarettes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
What are they?
Well, you know, many years ago when it looked as if people weren't going to be allowed to smoke traditional tobacco products, somebody invented these devices where one could add chemicals and air could be atomized, not differently than you have some kind of a device at home for kids who can't breathe, you know, some kind of a vaporizer. They made them into a device that had little tiny batteries. Some exploded because of the battery technology was very, very new. But they have these devices where people can vape or use vapor to breathe in certain smells or chemicals. And then, of course, they are expelling all of this noxious gas out into the atmosphere. And I think you've noticed when people drive by you and they vape, their windows open, it seems as if 100 times more smoke is coming out the window of their car. Yeah. It's always surprising that people open the window of their car as if to say, oh, this is so very offensive. And yet they don't seem to care what they're doing to the rest of the people who are smelling that.
Right. Well, many claim that it's harmless. Many also claim, well, I'm trying to come off of regular cigarettes and this is my transition. Does that really work?
Well, let me take you back to a time when people thought cigarettes weren't dangerous. I mean, some people still hold true to that ridiculousness today, but there were people in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s where the Marlboro Man was on every billboard in every town, and it was the thing to do. And people didn't believe forever that we got people hooked on cigarettes in the military, whatever it was, that it was ever going to be dangerous. Well, it's the Wild West out there again. Because as it turns out, the majority of people who vape, or even people who are exposed to that, don't believe that it's dangerous as well. How many people have to have cancer? How many people have to die? How many years or decades will have to go by before people will finally figure this out? And what people need to know is that the majority of companies, 95% of the money coming in right now to develop these products, these e-cigarettes, these vaping devices, is fronted by corporations with different names, but completely owned by those tobacco companies who realized they were going to be put out of business. Now, maybe some of them bought the companies after when they looked like they were going to be profitable, but most of them were started by the same people. And all you have to know is that fact to realize what ulterior motives these vaping people have. And because they're also putting chemicals in there that gives you addiction, nicotine and other things, because they want you to be hooked on it.
Right.
That again should show you where this road is leading in the future.
Interesting. Now, what about the liquid inside the e-cigarette? Can that be dangerous as well to children?
Poison. It's absolutely poison. Not only when it is atomized while people are breathing it in and the vapor comes out, which we now know has worse chemicals than any cigarette ever did. But the amount of kids going to the emergency rooms in this country and the amount of calls to poison control centers across this country every day from kids who have gotten a hold of this liquid that screws in or adapts, who have had it to drink or gotten in their eyes or noses. And imagine how toxic it is from getting the concentrated solution that ends up in your vaping device. It has become the #1 reason to call poison control in the United States, now surpassing people who open grandma's pills or whatever it was.
I'm thinking most of our public does not know that. So this is really good information. Now, is it because of the nicotine in the e-cigarette that it contains? Is that the dangerous piece of it?
Well, here's the neat thing. That's part of it. But let's be honest. When somebody wrapped up some tobacco and shoved it in a cigarette, how many chemicals could you really add? But now, with these vaping devices and this little bit of liquid, it's endless. It's endless. You know, we had to read in the paper today about a child in our community who just died from inhaling heroin. We know that the opiate problem in this community is horrendous. So now we have these companies trying to make all of these great solutions. How soon is it going to be before all of these opiates and other things are put into these vaping devices? People are buying these things seemingly legally, and you see people going around with their vaping devices actually taking part in narcotics and other things that kids can get a hold of. And so not just long-term problems with cancer and other issues, but we're really afraid that kids are going to get a hold of these devices soon and use them one time and die right there on the spot.
That's scary.
Very scary.
Well, as we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, first of all, I'm always appreciative that our wonderful school board is so in tune to what's going on that they allow me to come in to have these conversations with you, to dress in the way I do with my bizarre glasses and my opinionated way of speaking. But we're in a real crisis here with these issues. And what I want to go back is a couple of things before we go to our take-home messages. Number one, because I've said before that this hypoxia or low oxygen in mothers who smoke or expose their kids to smoke before birth and after causes brain growth and development problems that perhaps so many of our kids who are in all the special programs our school offers, who have all of these special rights, which they quite, of course, deserve, but how many of them were brought forth because of specific learning disabilities, because of living in the environment, of being in smoking or being exposed to that? And how much it would matter when the staff steps forward and tries to get some people to stop smoking, because neurons might be able to regrow or the brain can reorganize itself in the absence of hypoxia in order for those kids to thrive and no longer need the special help we have to give them and assimilate back into the general educational milieu. And so that is the main thing to think about. Not just the parents of the cars, but the fact that this is what is causing so many of our children perhaps to have attention deficit and to have other learning disabilities. But there's a couple of take-home messages that I want people to think of, and please excuse me for referring to something because it's so important, I don't want to forget something. We know that cigarettes, of course, and other tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, are the number one, their use is the number one preventable cause of death on Earth. 600,000 people every year die globally. But it's not the death we're talking about, it's everything else. Imagine if 600,000 die, you must multiply that number by 10 or 100 or whatever to come up with the number of people globally who are negatively affected by these products every year. And that's a terrible, terrible thing. The other thing I want to remind people about is that people should be asked to extinguish their cigarettes as they come onto school property. With enough of this strong language talking about the child abuse issues, at least with the staff, so they can be strong enough and care enough and show how much they care in their eyes so that maybe a few parents change their mind every day. And number one, they're sick and tired of being hassled every day. Or they finally say one day, you know, I've meant to quit for years. Maybe this is the reason I need. And also, as you step forward and try to talk to people on the school property, remember once again, people have no constitutional right to smoke. It is not allowed to do things that put the life of everybody else, including yourself, at risk. People don't have any right. The government is coming to terms with that because maybe tobacco, big tobacco, is no longer the biggest lobbyist in Washington. We know today our government has enough problems trying to handle the things that are going on in the world. It's kind of a grassroots thing. But we can get the staff of the schools to understand that it is worth, the people who tell you, complain every day, that it's worth to open your mouth because it actually may change everybody's life. And let's remember, we didn't spend time on third-hand smoke. Third-hand smoke is the smoke that gets on the clothes of the kids in your case. And then when those kids go in the classroom, they stunk from smoke getting out of the car. The classroom stinks the whole day. And then other people are breathing in those toxins that have been filtered out in the clothing, putting their life at risk as well. So these teachers are actually going to save their own lives, give themselves more longevity, cut down the amount of asthma and other allergies in the classroom if they get those kids out and not have to smell that tertiary or third-hand smoke in the classroom as well.
Thank you.
You know, we could go on and talk about these things for a very long time, but suffice it to say, 90% plus of the earth doesn't smoke. 90% of the people in this country understand it's killing all of us. So it's time for us to make a difference and do something. And that's what this conversation is about. And I am honored to be able to come here with you and have this bit of tape here so that people can sit and watch it at their leisure and hopefully be able to inspire them to make all of us healthy.
Well, thank you, Dr. Savel, again for your time. You've kind of become our regional expert on all topics, and we thank you for always coming in and being able to share with our public the importance of the issues today and also how they can advocate for themselves to say, put that cigarette out, not on this property, we're not going to have it. So thank you again.
I'm always honored and humbled to be with you. Thank you for asking me.
Of course.